Welcome, traveler, to another quiet night of legends. Tonight we set aside the noise of the day and step softly into the myths and gods of Zelda, a realm where creation begins not with men or kings, but with goddesses and forgotten spirits. As we let the candlelight burn low and the world fall into stillness, you may find yourself gently carried by stories as old as Hyrule itself. So close your eyes, breathe slowly, and let's wander into the dreamlike history of the divine that shaped the lands, the skies, and every tale of courage. The story of Zelda has always begun in myth. Long before swords were drawn, before heroes were named, before any single kingdom rose or fell, there was only chaos and formlessness. And then, as the oldest stories tell, 3 golden goddesses descended from the heavens, Din, Nehru, and Ferori, eternal sisters, each with her own essence, her own gift, her own mark upon creation. These 3 beings were not rulers in the way mortals know rulers. They were architects, creators, and weavers of existence itself. Din, the goddess of power, was said to have shaped the land. Where once there was nothing, she struck down her fiery arms, and from her strength came the mountains, the valleys, the jagged peaks, and the burning heart of the earth. Nehru, the goddess of wisdom, followed. From her hands flowed not stone or fire, but the law and order by which creation would be held together. She gave balance, gravity, and the invisible structure that keeps the world from unraveling. And then came Ferori, the goddess of courage, who breathed into the empty world the first sparks of life. Forests grew from her breath, animals walked upon the earth, and the earliest forms of humanity opened their eyes beneath her blessing. Together they completed creation, and as their final act, they forged the golden relic known as the Triforce. The Triforce, and unlike the goddesses themselves, was not alive, nor did it think. It was a perfect balance of their 3 essences, power, wisdom, and courage, left behind as a symbol and as a kind of divine keystone. With their work complete, the goddesses returned to the heavens, leaving the Triforce resting within the sacred realm, a dimension of stillness untouched by decay. The earliest Hylian, said to be descendants of those blessed by Ferori's life-giving spirit, told these myths in whispers and carvings. To them, the goddesses were not distant abstractions, but present forces in their world. Din's power was in the volcanoes and storms, Nehru's wisdom in the cycles of night and day, Ferori's courage in the hearts of mortals who tilled the land or ventured into forests. The myths shaped their understanding of life, and every generation carried them forward, never certain whether they were pure legend or sacred truth. But creation myths, as gentle as they sound, rarely exist without shadows. For even as the goddesses withdrew, they left behind the possibility of imbalance. If the Triforce were touched by one with a heart divided, its 3 pieces would shatter, scattering to those most aligned with each divine essence. And so even within perfection lay the seed of conflict, waiting for history to unfold. When we drift deeper into these myths, we begin to see how the gods were not just figures of creation, but forces that echoed through every era of Zelda's history. Take, for instance, the sacred realm itself, a dimension born not as a place of punishment, but as a resting chamber for the Triforce. Early myths described it as a mirror of paradise, where the world was always in balance. But stories warn that if one with an unbalanced heart entered, the sacred realm would twist to reflect their desires, turning heaven into a prison, or paradise into a wasteland. This idea alone reveals how the gods of Zelda differ from many mythologies of our own world. They are not constantly intervening, nor do they endlessly test humanity with lightning bolts and storms. Instead, they withdraw, and in their silence, mortals are left to grapple with temptation, with choices, and with the meaning of courage, wisdom, and power. In many ways, the gods of Zelda act less like rulers and more like the architects of a great puzzle, one that mortals are destined to solve and fail over and over again. Within this mythic foundation, another goddess arose in whispered legend, Hylia. Unlike the three golden creators, Hylia was not a cosmic architect, but a guardian, tasked with protecting the Triforce. Where Din, Nehru, and Furore withdrew, Hylia lingered, her duty entwined with the mortal world. And when the demon king Demise arose from the darkness, seeking to claim the Triforce for himself, it was Hylia who led the charge against him. The war against Demise is told in Skyward Sword with the weight of a forgotten epic. Demise's armies of monsters swept across the world, and mortals suffered in his shadow. Hylia gathered both gods and mortals to oppose him, and the battle raged with such ferocity that the earth itself cracked. In the end, Hylia sealed Demise away, but at a cost. Weakened, she could no longer protect the Triforce in her divine form, and so she made a choice rare for a god. She relinquished divinity, choosing to be reborn as a mortal so that she might guide humanity directly. Thus began the cycle of Zelda, the princess who bears not only royal blood, but the spirit of the goddess Hylia herself. Through each age, whether as a sage, a warrior, or a monarch, Zelda is more than a princess of Hyrule. She is a fragment of divinity walking among mortals. This too reshaped myth into destiny. It blurred the line between God and human, showing that in Zelda's world, divinity is not always distant, but sometimes hidden in the soft voice of a princess who prays for her people's safety. But even in these myths of light, darkness remains ever present. For as much as the goddesses created, forces arose that seemed to defy their balance. Demise was the first great shadow, but not the last. In Majora's Mask, for instance, we encounter Majora, a being so strange that scholars still debate whether it was a god, a demon, or something entirely alien. Its mask is said to hold terrifying power, enough to bring the moon itself crashing to the earth. And unlike Demise, Majora's origin is shrouded in obscurity. Some believe it was once a trickster deity from a far-off land, worshipped by an ancient tribe. Others say it was born of chaos itself, a remnant left behind when the goddesses shaped the world. What makes Majora so unsettling is not merely its destructive force, but its inscrutability. While Din, Nehru, and Furore embody clear virtues, Majora is chaos without purpose, destruction without balance. Its very presence challenges the idea of a harmonious creation. And yet even this reflects a deeper mythic truth, that no creation is perfect, and that even gods may leave behind mysteries too great for mortals to understand. When we trace these stories through the ages, we begin to notice a pattern. The gods act rarely, but their influence is eternal. Their silence allows mortals to stumble, to rise and to fall. The goddesses never strike down Ganondorf directly, though his malice is a direct corruption of the Triforce's balance. They never rescue Link from his trials, though his courage embodies Furore's blessing. Instead, they let the cycle unfold. Hero rises, villain falls, princess guides, and balance is restored for a time. This eternal cycle is itself a kind of myth. Each age tells the story of a hero chosen by fate, and each age forgets that the story has been told before. But the gods remember. Perhaps, in their silence, they see beauty in the repetition, like a song played across the centuries, with slight variations, but always the same refrain. And so, when the Hylians pray to the goddesses, or when Zelda raises her voice in divine song, the sense is not of asking for intervention, but of honoring a story much larger than themselves. It is the acknowledgement that their lives are threads woven into a divine tapestry. Even failure, even tragedy has its place, because the cycle will begin anew, guided by the unseen hands of Din, Nehru, and Farora. As we close this first wave, imagine the scene of creation as the earliest Hylians might have envisioned it. A sky without stars, a land without form. And then three figures descending, luminous and vast, their essence pouring into the empty world. Din's fiery arm shaping mountains, Nehru's blue light weaving laws, Farore's green breath stirring the first life. And then silence as the goddesses vanish, leaving only the Triforce, gleaming like a lantern in the dark. A world born in balance, left in the care of mortals and haunted by shadows. A myth that is not only told but lived again and again across the endless ages of Zelda's history. After the golden goddesses withdrew and the Triforce rested in silence within the sacred realm, the world did not remain without guardians, for though the three creators had departed to the heavens, leaving only their relic, the balance of creation required caretakers, beings who would linger closer to the mortal world. These were not gods in the same sense as Din, Nehru, and Farora, but divine spirits, chosen protectors, and otherworldly guides who wove themselves into the fabric of Hyrule's history. Foremost among them was the goddess Hylia, whose presence bridged the divide between godhood and mortality. We spoke of her before, but her influence is worth lingering upon, for without her, much of Hyrule's mythos would dissolve into scattered fragments. Hylia is unique among the divine, for she is not remembered only as a distant figure. She became Zelda, flesh and spirit intermingled, reincarnated through every age. Her choice to abandon divinity for humanity was not an ending, but a transformation. It created a living lineage of gods walking among mortals, bearing all the burdens and vulnerabilities that come with flesh. In this way, the myths of Zelda take on a gentleness, for while other worlds' gods may remain unreachable, high upon mountains or cloaked in endless silence, the people of Hyrule always know their goddess is near. She is born again and again, with new names and new faces, but with the same divine spark carried forward. The myths of Hylia remind mortals that even in their darkest hours they are never abandoned, for their goddess chooses to walk beside them rather than rule above them. Yet Hylia was not the only divine spirit tied to Hyrule's protection. Across the lands, legends speak of the light spirits, four radiant beings who emerged to banish evil and guard the balance of nature. Their names, Ordona, Farron, Eldin, and Lanairu, echo the elements of life itself. Ordona, the gentle spirit of the pastoral lands, watched over fields and farms. Farron, bound to the forest, guarded the untamed heart of nature. Eldin embodied the fires and mountains, fierce and steadfast. And Lanairu, the most mysterious, represented wisdom, law, and the flowing waters. In Twilight Princess, these light spirits become visible when the balance of the world falters. The twilight invades, spreading like an unnatural dusk, and the light spirits appear as radiant creatures to guide Link. Their forms are ethereal, shimmering beasts made of flowing light, and their voices are calm, solemn, touched with timelessness. They do not rush into battle, nor do they conquer darkness by force. Instead, they purify, they guide, they restore. They are guardians of balance, intervening only when the fabric of reality frays beyond mortal ability. One could imagine the ancient Hylians kneeling before the light spirits in awe, whispering prayers into the night air, believing that these beings walked unseen among forests, mountains, and rivers. In many ways, the light spirits feel like fragments of the goddesses themselves, splinters of their power given form so that the mortal world would not collapse in their absence. When we think of Hyrule as a land defined by balance, it is the light spirits who ensure that balance does not fade. But guardians take many forms, and in Zelda's world, even dragons have carried the mantle of divinity. In Skyward Sword, the three great dragons, Faron, Eldin, and Aniru, echo the very regions they oversee. They are not merely beasts of scale and wing, but timeless protectors, each bound to the elements of their realms. Faron, guardian of waters, manifests as an immense serpent-like dragon who dwells within the forests and lakes. Eldin, bound to fire and mountain, radiates both warmth and ferocity. Lanairu, tied to desert and lightning, speaks with the wisdom of ages, though weakened by time when Link first encounters him. These dragons are not all powerful. They grow weary, they can be poisoned, they can falter. But what makes them divine is their endurance through ages and their role as eternal witnesses to Hyrule's cycles. Where mortals live and die in fleeting spans of years, the dragons endure centuries, observing, guiding, and occasionally challenging the hero to prove his worth. Their existence suggests that the gods, in their wisdom, did not leave Hyrule unguarded. They wove into its very nature creatures that could not only survive the ages, but embody the essence of the lands themselves. Other dragons across Zelda's stories reinforce this idea of divinity wrapped in scaled form. Valoo, the mighty sky spirit of the Wind Waker, resides high upon Dragon Roost Island. To the Rito people, he is a guardian and benefactor, granting them the ability to grow wings and take to the skies. His fiery breath defends the land, and his authority is so great that when disturbed, the entire tribe trembles in fear. And yet, despite his immense power, Valoo is not untouchable. When a disturbance in his mountain lair causes him pain, he lashes out in wrath, endangering his own people. It is only with Link's help that Valoo is calmed, his divinity restored to harmony. This duality, divine yet vulnerable, guardian yet dependent, defines many of Zelda's spirits. They are greater than mortals, yes, but they are not perfect. They, too, reflect the fragility of balance. If we move further into legend, we find another divine creature, one wrapped in dreamlike mystery, the windfish. Unlike the dragons or light spirits, the windfish does not dwell in the material world, but within the realm of dreams. In Link's awakening, the windfish slumbers within a giant egg atop Mount Tamaranch, dreaming the entire island of Koholint into existence. Every village, every forest, every inhabitant of that island is not real, but a fragment of the windfish's dream. To awaken the windfish is to end the dream, dissolving Koholint and all who dwell there. Here we glimpse a myth unlike any other in Zelda. The windfish is a god of dreams, a being whose imagination creates entire realities, and yet it is not malevolent. Its dream, though fragile, is a gift, a world where Link rests, learns, and grows. When Link ultimately awakens the windfish, the dream fades, but the windfish reassures him that what is dreamed is never truly lost. This divine being embodies not law or protection, but the ephemeral beauty of imagination and the bittersweet nature of endings. The windfish connects deeply with the bedtime quality of Zelda's myths. Just as we drift into dreams each night, knowing they will dissolve with morning light, so too does Koholint exist as a fleeting dream of a god. And perhaps that is why this story resonates so strongly. It reflects our own experience of dreams, of how real they feel while they last, and how tender the memory becomes once they are gone. When we consider these divine spirits together, Hylia, the light spirits, the dragons, and the windfish, we see a pattern emerge. Zelda's mythology is not content to leave divinity as distant, abstract, or untouchable. Instead, it scatters godlike beings throughout the land, each tied to nature, to cycles, to dreams. They appear not as flawless, omnipotent deities, but as guardians who sometimes falter, who require mortals to aid them, who leave mysteries behind. And this makes the myths of Zelda feel profoundly human. The gods of Hyrule are not removed from the world. They live in rivers, in flames, in dreams, in forests. They suffer, they grow tired, and they rely upon mortals as much as mortals rely upon them. In this way, every hero's journey becomes more than a mortal tale. It becomes a story of partnership between humanity and divinity. The hero is not merely chosen by fate, but becomes the hands by which the gods maintain balance. Even the way these divine spirits appear to link reflects this bond. The light spirits glow faintly, their forms shimmering like candlelight through smoke. Dragons speak with voices that carry both thunder and weariness. The windfish sings in haunting melodies, its lullabies echoing like waves upon a shore. All of them are dreamlike, blurred, almost intangible. They are gods not of certainty, but of mystery, leaving mortals to interpret their silence, their cryptic words, their half-glimpsed forms. As this second wave draws to a close, imagine walking through Hyrule at night, with the stars above you and the forest whispering in the wind. You might believe that in every shadow of a tree a light spirit lingers, that high upon a distant mountain a dragon slumbers, its breath rolling out as thunderclouds, that across the desert the echoes of Lanayru's voice carry on the wind, or that in your own dreams the windfish stirs, creating worlds that vanish with dawn. The gods of Zelda are not always present, but they are always near. They live in the silence between storms, in the glow of moonlight on rivers, in the warm breath of morning winds. They are reminders that the divine is not only found in temples or relics, but in the quiet presence of the world itself. And so the people of Hyrule continue to tell their stories, generation after generation, never certain whether these spirits walk among them, but always feeling their presence when the world grows still. There is a certain hush that falls over Hyrule when you speak of things that live in shadow, a softness that comes from the recognition that not every protector carries a bright lantern. Some guardians watch from dusk, their vigilance shaped by secrecy or sorrow rather than by banners and bells. Think of the Sheikah first. A people folded into legend the way a cloak is folded into a chest, kept close, rarely shown, always useful when winter comes. Their presence in Hyrule is not the trumpet call of kings, but the whisper of pages turned in the dead of night. They are watchers, record keepers, and craftspeople of hidden arts, and their histories thread through the kingdoms in the form of silent shrines, camouflaged towers, and ancient mechanisms whose blue light hums like a heart beneath the earth. Imagine, if you will, a village at dawn and a stone pillar on its edge. The pillar seems ordinary until you lean near and feel the faint thrum of protective spells, the residue of long-ago rituals set down by hands that chose invisibility as their armor. This is the Sheikah's trade: to keep what must be kept, to hide what must be hidden, and to accept that sometimes the best way to protect is to become almost invisible. And yet the Sheikah are not merely secretive technicians. They are also a cautionary tale. In the layers of their history, you can find the seeds of a downfall caused by love for a land and fear of its destruction. The guardians in later ages, those spider-legged sentinels that walk Hyrule's fields, are at once marvels of engineering and monuments to a trust misplaced. They were built to watch and to shield, to stand like slow, mechanical shepherds against calamity. But when calamity arrives, tools can be twisted into weapons. Picture a machine waking in the wrong age, its purpose corrupted by malice, its eyes turning from blue to red. There is a quiet tragedy in this transformation. A creation designed as a cradle becomes, in time, a prison or a scourge. The Sheikah's loyalty becomes, paradoxically, the reason they must stand apart. Guardians who cannot be everywhere and whose pots of protection sometimes boil over into harm when history turns cruel. Not all guardians hide in the shade of high technology. There are guardians wrapped more thoroughly in myth than in metal, creatures whose forms are sewn from the very landscape they protect. Consider the dragons of legend, Pharaon, Eldin, and Lanairu in Skyward Sword, and their cousins and echoes in other stories. These dragons are not merely beasts. They are old appointments of nature itself, appointed to watch rivers, mountains, and skies. Dragons in Zelda do not roar only to terrify. They speak with a voice like weather, patient and slow, and their counsel is that of beings older than language. Imagine the soft scrape of a dragon's scales under moonlight as it turns to listen to a visitor who has come with a question too small for men, but heavy enough to bend a mountain. Dragons are caretakers of balance who sometimes need the help of a mortal hero to heal their wounds, not because the mortals are greater, but because gods sometimes need translation, a hands-on humility that only living, breathing people can provide. The relationship between dragon and human in Zelda is intimate in this way. It is less patronage and more a partnership of sense and service. Other guardians live in laughter and smallness rather than in storms, creatures like the Koroks, who rustle out from the leaves to smile and then vanish again like a warm memory. They are the echoes of a previous age's children who were once forest folk. Their presence is a kind of promise that life persists, that joy is its own kind of defense. The Koroks do not stand upon battlements, but they protect the forest by continuing to be the forest's heartbeat, capricious, tender, and small. If you have ever found one tucked beneath a fallen stone, giggling as it hands you a seed, you have touched an ancient covenant. In their tiny, laughing faces, there is the radical assertion that guardianship can be an act of continual play, the deliberate refusal to be overwhelmed by grief. To fall asleep thinking of them is to imagine leaves breathing, keeping watch with the slow patience of seasons. But woven through all these guardianship stories are darker threads, stories of shadow that are not merely empty absence, but active, brooding forces. The Shadow Temple in Ocarina of Time is a place where such force congeals. It is not just a dungeon to be solved, it is a weighty archive of a people's darkest deeds. Imagine standing in its corridors and hearing, barely, the echo of shackles, the grinding of stones, the muted voices of those who were broken there. The temple's design whispers of cruelty that once hid itself beneath officialdom. The kind of suppression meant to prevent greater chaos, but which ended up creating its own ruin. Temples like this one remind us that sometimes guardianship is used as a pretense for control, and that the line between protection and oppression can be as thin and sharp as a blade. As you let your eyes grow heavy, let the thought of such places be a soft warning rather than a horror, a suggestion that history is rarely all heroism and sometimes forgets its victims. Termina offers a different kind of shadow, one not made of policy, but of wound and grief, a melancholy world folded from the same cloth as Hyrule, but cut to a darker pattern. Majora's Mask is a study in sorrow wearing strange faces. The mask itself is a wound disguised as an object, a thing that amplifies desire and despair until a world trembles. In Termina, the moon's grin is a slow metronome of dread, and the people move through 3 days with a peculiar fatalism. Where you might expect a single monstrous general to march across the field, here the threat is intimacy itself. The way grief can twist laughter into mania, or how fear can make neighbors turn inward. Link's role here is less about slaying and more about caring. He puts on masks that hold fragments of other lives, and in wearing them, he becomes a vessel for lost stories. There is tenderness in this burden. Link does not simply vanquish the enemy. He carries memories across the thin line that separates living from dead. To slip into sleep with this image is to imagine a city humming with quiet elegies, each citizen a lantern of story held up against an inevitable fall. And then there are the fallen gods, the concept of which is perhaps most chilling in the figure of Demise. In Skyward Sword, we see the origin of the endless sorrow. Demise's anger becomes a curse that echoes across incarnations, a repeated storm that drags villainy from age to age. The myth suggests that some evils do not die. They repeat, reincarnated as new grievances and new tyrants. It is not that the world is destined to be terrible, but that the memory of violence has the stubbornness of weeds. There is a fatalistic tenderness to this idea, an understanding that even as heroes arise, the soil remembers. It asks us to be patient and persistent, because the fight against such deep-rooted sorrow requires more than a single champion. It asks for generations. Majora, again, complicates the picture by suggesting that not every cosmic horror is about conquest. Some darkness is an ache, an alien loneliness fed into a mask and misread as malice. Others, like Ganon's many forms across histories, are more straightforwardly grasping, embodiments of covetousness that treat the Triforce as a prize. Yet even as Ganon models greed given monstrous voice, the story encourages you to consider the context. What does such hunger come from? Some myths whisper that scarcity breeds desperation that hardens into cruel desire. This makes the villain human in a sad, useful way, and the narrative invites pity alongside resistance. In the hush before sleep, let this soften your sense of villainy, that often what becomes monstrous began as need misrouted. If guardians can become weapons and gods can become curses, then forgiveness and healing occupy a special kind of magic in Zelda, the kind that does not erase the past but holds it with a gentleness that lets it breathe. Midna's story in Twilight Princess is one such soft miracle, an exile who becomes beloved, who learns to bear her people's sorrow and to trust a hero whose kindness is small but constant. Her partnership with Link shows how trust is itself a form of guardianship. It teaches that to protect is to accept another's help, to let betweenness exist as strength rather than weakness. And so the cycle of guardianship becomes reciprocal. Gods need people, people need gods, and both need strangers who will extend a hand. Finally, think of the small human acts that make up the background of all these large myths. A farmer lighting a shrine candle at dusk, a child leaving an offering of fruit at a forest stone, a scholar copying faded glyphs by candlelight. These are the tiny commitments that keep the world whole. You do not need to slay a beast to be a guardian. Sometimes you simply need to remember what must be remembered. As you surrender to sleep, imagine these small rituals continuing in soft chorus. Candles guttering, leaves falling, and somewhere a dragon dreaming with one eye half open. The guardians of Zelda's world, secretive tribes, ancient dragons, laughing spirits, sorrowful masks, and weary machines are all held together by such small acts. They are, in the end, less monuments than lives, and that is the most comforting truth to carry into rest. Even in shadow, there is a watchfulness that will not sleep, and that watchfulness learns to be gentle over time. The world of Zelda is stitched together not only by its characters and legends, but also by the places where those legends are tested. Across the many incarnations of Hyrule and the lands beyond, the temples and trials stand as thresholds, doorways between the ordinary and the divine. They are places where time slows, where music reverberates against stone, and where every torchlit corridor seems to carry the weight of myth. In truth, they are not merely dungeons to be solved by a player. They are living stories, embodiments of themes, and guardians in their own right, for each temple is less a building and more an echo of something eternal. The Forest Temple, for instance, in Ocarina of Time, is one of the earliest and most enduring examples of this idea. Nestled deep within the sacred woods, it presents itself not as a mere ruin, but as a house of memory, overgrown with vines and infused with the lingering presence of spirits. It is less frightening than it is melancholy, as if the forest itself once built this place to remember. The twisted corridors and shifting geometry give the impression of a dream half-remembered, reminding the traveler that entering the temple means entering a space where logic bends to something older than reason. The battle with Phantom Ganon is not simply a duel with a foe. It is a confrontation with illusion, with the idea that shadows may mock the real. In this way, the Forest Temple becomes not just a trial of courage, but of clarity, asking, can you tell truth from echo? Can you stand in a place where memory itself has teeth? And then there is the Fire Temple, built in the very heart of Death Mountain, where heat and flame are constant companions. Here the Gorons, creatures of stone and endurance, find themselves imprisoned by the very element they revere. The temple feels alive, its walls glowing as if magma were blood pulsing just beneath the surface. The trial here is not simply survival, it is compassion. For Link must free the Gorons, one by one, understanding that bravery is measured not only by defeating the dragon Volvagia, but by easing the suffering of others along the way. The Fire Temple's resonance lies in its duality. A place of danger and destruction becomes, through acts of rescue, a place of salvation. It teaches that the role of a hero is not to conquer an environment, but to transform its meaning. The Water Temple, perhaps the most infamous of them all, presents an entirely different rhythm. To many players, it is remembered as a labyrinth of shifting levels and endless frustration. But beneath that frustration lies its thematic heart: patience, adaptability, and perspective. To succeed in the Water Temple, one must literally rise and fall with the water, altering one's relationship to space and time. It becomes less about fighting enemies and more about learning to see differently, to accept that the world is not fixed. And when the trial culminates in the duel with Dark Link, a shadowy reflection that emerges in a still pool, the Water Temple reveals its true purpose. It is not a test of strength, but of self. The most dangerous opponent is not a monster lurking in the deep, but the reflection in the water, the possibility that fear and doubt can undo a hero. In this way, the temple becomes a meditation chamber, a watery mirror where the greatest challenge is to confront your own essence. The Shadow Temple, as we touched upon earlier, is a place of dread. But let us expand further on its meaning. Located beneath Kakariko Village, it embodies the forgotten sins of a kingdom that once built its stability on cruelty. Unlike the other temples, which feel tied to elements of nature, forest, fire, water, spirit, the Shadow Temple feels tied to history. It is not nature that must be conquered here, but memory itself, and the acceptance that light and dark coexist even in a kingdom of heroes. The whispers that fill its halls, the hidden guillotines and traps, all suggest a truth that cannot be ignored. Hyrule is not innocent. Yet by walking its halls and confronting the monsters that dwell within, Link redeems this history, not by erasing it, but by surviving it, carrying its lesson forward. To fall asleep to thoughts of the Shadow Temple is to realize that every kingdom, no matter how noble, has corners it would rather not see. Yet seeing them is the only way to heal. Then there is the Spirit Temple, a place that reaches across time itself. Located at the edge of the desert, it is unique in that Link must approach it both as a child and as an adult, each version of himself unlocking paths the other cannot. It is here that the theme of duality becomes most striking. Innocence and experience, youth and maturity, present and past. Nabooru, the sage who was awakened here, embodies the struggle of one caught between allegiance and morality, a Gyarados, who questions the path of her people under Ganondorf's rule. The Spirit Temple asks the traveler to consider the long arc of time, that actions taken in youth echo into adulthood, that choices ripple forward. Its very structure, divided between eras, serves as an architectural metaphor for growth. To linger here in thought is to drift into a dream of deserts at twilight, where shifting sands carry whispers from both childhood and age. In other games, temples and trials continue this tradition of being more than mere places of challenge. In Twilight Princess, the Arbiter's grounds stand as a decayed monument to judgment, a place where the restless dead linger, tethered to regrets. The Temple of Time itself reappears not just as a gateway, but as a labyrinth filled with statues, reminding us that time is not just a river, but a weight. In Skyward Sword, the Silent Realms present trials without combat, where the hero is stripped of weapons and must rely on courage alone, running barefoot across dreamscapes, pursued by guardians who do not forgive hesitation. These silent trials are some of the most haunting and intimate experiences in Zelda lore, because they strip the myth down to its essence. Courage is not about swinging a sword, but about moving forward when fear claws at your throat. Across all these temples and trials, music weaves itself as a guide. In Ocarina of Time, each temple is accessed or complemented by a melody, and the songs themselves become more than tools. They are incantations that fold time and space. To play the Song of Time, to shift a block or open a door, is to realize that music itself is a guardian, a key, a companion. Later games would continue this tradition, from the Wind Waker's conducting of gales to the haunting harp of Skyward Sword. And so each temple is not silent stone, but a kind of living score, each corridor a staff upon which courage is written. But why do temples matter so much in the dreamlike cadence of Zelda's mythos? Perhaps because they embody the rhythm of life itself. They are the trials we all face, whether it is the heat of crisis, the water of patience, the shadow of memory, or the spirit of time. They are not arbitrary constructions, but mirrors reflecting the quiet struggles of being alive. And as the player journeys through them, they carry these metaphors unconsciously, their own memories mingling with the stone, the fire, the water, and the echoes of shadow. To drift into slumber with these temples in mind is to imagine yourself wandering endless halls, lit by torches that never go out, guided by melodies that never fade. The forest temple hums with leaves like lullabies. The fire temple glows with warmth rather than fear. The water temple ripples like a gentle tide rocking you to rest. The shadow temple whispers truths softly, like secrets folded into dreams, while the spirit temple opens wide as a desert night, reminding you that time is vast and you are part of its song. In this way, Zelda's temples are not just trials of a game. They are bedtime stories written in stone and shadow, stories of growth, reflection, and transformation. Each one holds not only treasure chests and keys, but lessons tucked quietly into their walls. Lessons that, once learned, follow the player long after the console is turned off and long into the quiet of night. In the world of Zelda, mythology never exists in a vacuum. It thrives on balance, on the eternal back and forth between opposing forces, each holding just enough sway to ensure that neither side can claim complete dominion. If Hyrule's gods and myths are woven into a grand design, then at its very heart lies the theme of duality. Light and dark, order and chaos, creation and destruction, mercy and wrath. To explore these myths is to wander into a place where gods and forces exist in careful tension, ensuring the balance of the universe is preserved, however fragile that balance may be. And in this wave, we step deeper into that theme, tracing how the divine order of Zelda is constantly caught between opposing poles, giving rise to some of the saga's most fascinating and obscure legends. The most obvious duality in the Zelda mythos begins, as so many things do, with the Triforce itself. When Din, Nehru, and Ferori shaped the world, they left behind their sacred gift. But that golden triangle was not just a prize, it was a mirror, one that reflects the will and nature of whoever possesses it. Power, wisdom, and courage. 3 virtues meant to be in harmony. Yet history shows us how rarely that harmony is achieved. More often, one aspect becomes dominant, overshadowing the others. Power unchecked, as seen with Ganon, leads to oppression and darkness. Wisdom without compassion can grow cold and calculating, like a crystal palace in which life is trapped. Courage, when stripped of judgment, risks plunging into reckless folly. The Triforce itself is proof of duality, not because of its divisions, but because of how it magnifies the strengths and weaknesses of its bearer. It is a divine object designed to balance the cosmos, but in human or inhuman hands, it often tips the scales. We see this reflected in the broader mythos of Hyrule's gods and their echoes across time. Consider the goddesses themselves. Din, fiery and destructive, brings both life and devastation. Nehru, the giver of law, sets boundaries that both protect and restrain. Ferori, nurturing the spirit of life, offers compassion, but also introduces unpredictability. None of them are one-dimensional forces of good or evil. They embody contradictions, and those contradictions ripple outward into the stories of mortals and gods alike. Din's flames create land but also scorch it. Nehru's order builds societies but fosters rigidity. Ferori's spontaneity encourages heroism but risks chaos. These are not gods to be worshipped in a simple sense. They are gods to be respected, feared, and understood, for each holds both the gift and the curse of her domain. Then we descend into another layer of myth, the battle between light and shadow. In Hyrulean legend, light is rarely depicted as absolute purity. Instead, it is a fragile flame that must be protected against encroaching darkness. Think of the light spirits in Twilight Princess, entities that guard sacred lands but struggle against corruption. Their very existence shows that light in the Zelda mythos is not all-powerful. It must be defended. Likewise, the Twilight, descendants of a people banished to shadow, are not evil by default. They were punished for their ambition, yes, but they live in a realm that is not inherently malevolent. It is exile, not essence, that defines them. In this we see Zelda's mythology reflecting a truth. Shadow is not always villainy, but an essential counterpart to light. Without shadow, there is no definition of brightness. Without night, dawn cannot be cherished. This duality manifests most dramatically in the recurring cycle of the hero, the princess, and the Dark Lord. Each incarnation repeats the myth, the courage of the hero rising to meet the power of the tyrant, guided by the wisdom of the princess. It is not simply a tale of good triumphing over evil. It is a cosmic necessity, a rebalancing of the scales. When Ganondorf seizes power, he is not acting outside the order of the world, but within it. He is the inevitable shadow that rises whenever the balance tips too far toward one side. Link is the counterweight, summoned by fate or by divine hand to restore equilibrium. And Zelda herself, as bearer of wisdom, is the intermediary, the stabilizer who keeps both forces in line, ensuring that courage does not lose itself in recklessness, and that power does not obliterate everything in its path. The mythology of the Twilight realm deepens this theme. The Twili were once the interlopers, sorcerers who sought to claim divine power for themselves. Their punishment, banishment to a twilight world, was not destruction, but transformation. In their realm, they became something new, living beings of shadow touched by faint light. It is telling that when Midna, the Twilight Princess, enters the story, she is neither villain nor saint. She is mischievous, pragmatic, distrustful, yet deeply loyal once her heart is revealed. Through her, the Zelda mythos whispers that shadow itself is not evil. It is simply misunderstood, misused, or mishandled. Light alone cannot sustain the world, just as shadow alone cannot rule it. Together, they form the liminal space where balance is struck. Another myth worth considering is that of Hylia, the goddess who gave up her divinity to protect humanity. If we see Din, Nayru, and Ferori as cosmic architects, Hylia is the guardian, the protector, willing to surrender godhood to dwell among mortals. Yet even here, duality lingers. By relinquishing her immortality, she introduces mortality into her divine essence. She bridges the gap between God and human, light and flesh, eternity and impermanence. Zelda herself, in her many incarnations, is the living testament of this duality. She is both mortal princess and divine echo, carrying the memory of Hylia, yet experiencing the vulnerability of human life. She is wisdom embodied, but she is also fragile. Her capture, her suffering, her sacrifices, they remind us that wisdom does not exist in isolation, but in the messy, imperfect world of human choice and consequence. The Sheikah, too, stand as a reflection of this eternal balance. Tasked with serving the royal family and protecting Hyrule, they embody both devotion and secrecy. Their loyalty is unquestionable, but their methods often blur the line between light and shadow. They operate in hidden places, wield forbidden magics, and in some stories, they are feared as much as they are revered. The Sheikah's duality lies in their role, protectors of the light who must dwell in shadow to accomplish their goals. In Breath of the Wild, this manifests in the Sheikah technology, tools of great wisdom that also risk destruction, such as the guardians that can protect or annihilate, depending on who controls them. The Sheikah remind us that divine power, no matter how noble its intention, can easily slip into danger when wielded without restraint. What makes these dualities so captivating is how deeply they resonate with human experience. Light and shadow, order and chaos, power and restraint. These are not just divine conflicts. but reflections of our own struggles. When we see Link stand against Ganon, we are not merely watching a hero defeat a villain. We are witnessing the reenactment of a cosmic myth that lives within us. The struggle to find balance in our own lives, to temper ambition with humility, wisdom with compassion, courage with caution. Zelda's mythology invites us to see ourselves in its stories, to recognize that every god, every hero, and every villain is a fragment of the same grand design. And in this wave, as we let the myths wash over us, we realize that perhaps the true divinity of Zelda lies not in its gods, but in its cycles. The gods created the world, yes, but it is the eternal dance between opposites that sustains it. The fire of Din will always burn, and the waters of Hyrule will always cool it. Farora's spirit will always bring life, but shadow will always remind that life of its limits. The hero will always rise, and the Dark Lord will always return. And Zelda, in her wisdom, will always stand between them, holding the fragile balance of a world forever caught between light and dark. So as we close this wave, we carry with us the quiet understanding that Zelda's gods are not meant to be worshipped as flawless beings. They are, instead, mirrors of existence itself, beings of contradiction, whose very imperfections make them divine. Their myths do not tell us how to live. They tell us that to live is to balance, always, on the narrow line between extremes. When we speak of the gods of Zelda, the mind often turns first to the golden goddesses, the trinity that shaped the world. But beneath the surface of Hyrule's lore lies another layer, one made up of strange and often contradictory figures who don't quite fit into neat categories of light or dark, benevolent or cruel. They are beings who are worshipped, feared, or whispered about in myths. Their stories may come from dreams, from alternate worlds, or from timelines that slip away from Hyrule's central history. These forgotten gods, or perhaps lesser gods, carry with them mysteries that expand Zelda's mythology into something far richer and stranger than what is immediately apparent. One of the most enigmatic of these figures is the fierce deity, a being who emerges in Majora's Mask. The fierce deity is not a goddess, nor a demon, but something beyond either, a force of raw divinity channeled through a mask. When Link dons the fierce deity's mask, he is transformed into a towering warrior, brimming with immense, almost divine strength. In a game filled with the questions about masks, identity, and the nature of the self, the fierce deity stands out as a mystery. Who is this being whose power can be borrowed through a mask? Was the fierce deity a god worshipped in ancient times, or perhaps a hero so mighty that legend elevated him to the level of divinity? Some interpretations suggest that the fierce deity was once a god of battle, one who embodied the overwhelming force of conflict, a kind of war god whose wrath could match even Majora itself. The name fierce deity hints at a paradox, fierceness paired with holiness. In many mythologies, gods of war often hold this contradiction. They are revered for their strength, their ability to protect or to destroy, yet feared for the very same qualities. The fierce deity seems to embody this duality perfectly. When Link wears the mask, he becomes something terrifying, almost too powerful, his attacks flowing with unnatural might. The game itself warns that this form is so powerful, it can make the final battle feel almost unfair, like divinity itself descending into a mortal fight. If Majora is the trickster god of chaos, then the fierce deity is its equal and opposite, a god of wrath and justice, but one whose motives remain hidden. The fact that we know so little about this deity is perhaps the point. Some gods are not meant to be fully understood, only channeled in fleeting moments of desperate need. And if the fierce deity is a god of overwhelming strength, then Majora is its inverse, a god, or perhaps demon, of mischief, chaos, and destruction. Majora's Mask itself is the vessel of this being, but what lies behind it is even murkier. The game never reveals who or what Majora truly is. Some legends in the Majora's Mask manga describe Majora as a monstrous creature that lived in the wilderness, its body covered in scales, its power immense, and its life ended only when a traveling warrior danced and battled with it for days. When Majora died, its armor was fashioned into the mask that would later wreak havoc in Termina. In the game, however, we see Majora not as a monster, but as a willful, almost playful force that possesses Skull Kid, amplifying his loneliness and pain into cataclysmic destruction. Majora represents the god of chaos untamed. Not unlike trickster gods in world mythology, Loki, Coyote, and Anansi, figures who meddle, disrupt, and unsettle the order of the cosmos. Yet unlike many trickster gods, Majora does not act with wit or humor, but with an almost childlike cruelty. It is a being that delights in twisting reality, stretching the moon's face into a grotesque smile, threatening to bring the sky crashing down onto the land below. To face Majora is to face a god of madness, one whose power grows the longer it festers in the heart of its chosen vessel. That Link can only defeat it by becoming the fierce deity, suggests a balance once again. Chaos can only be met by divinity of equal measure, shadow answered by light, madness by righteous wrath. Beyond the battles of gods and demons lies the dreamlike figure of the Windfish, a divine presence from Link's awakening. Unlike the destructive deities, the Windfish embodies something quieter, more elusive, the god of dreams. Found slumbering in a giant egg atop Mount Tamaranch, the Windfish is not worshipped in the usual way. Its existence is a mystery, its influence felt only through the strange dream world of Koholint Island. The entire island, its people, its monsters, even its music, all are said to be part of the Windfish's dream. When Link awakens the Windfish by playing the Ballad of the Windfish, Koholint Island vanishes, as though it were never real. Was the island a gift, a trial, or merely the subconscious wandering of a sleeping god? The Windfish represents another form of divinity in Zelda, one that is not active but passive, not commanding but dreaming. Many mythologies include gods of dreams or sleep, deities whose imagination gives rise to worlds of illusion. The Windfish fits this mold, though, with a uniquely Zelda twist. Its dream is a prison and a refuge at once. Link's journey on Koholint is meaningful to him and to the characters he meets, yet ultimately it is ephemeral, dissolving when the god awakens. The Windfish's divine power, then, is the power of impermanence. It whispers to us that not all divine acts are eternal. Some gods create only fleeting dreams, beautiful precisely because they cannot last. There are other beings, too, who dwell on the edges of Zelda's divine tapestry. The Uka, strange bird-like creatures found in Twilight Princess, are described as descendants of a sky race, possibly closer to the gods than to mortals. The ancient texts in Hyrule speak of how the Uka helped humans craft civilization, teaching them technology and magic. They are unsettling in form, small, fragile, and uncanny, but their presence implies a forgotten link between gods and men, a time when the heavens were not so distant from the earth. Are the Uka servants of the goddesses, or remnants of some divine experiment left to wither in the shadows of myth? Their floating city, the city in the sky, is itself a divine echo, aloof, unreachable, a fragment of heaven that still lingers above the mortal world. And then there are whispers of other worlds where gods may differ entirely. In Termina, the people worship the four giants, colossal guardians who stand at the compass points of the land. Unlike Hyrule's goddesses, these are localized deities, gods of protection rather than creation. Their myth tells of how they once lived among the people, but retreated to the four corners of the world to watch over it. When Termina is threatened, they rise again, their massive forms halting the descent of the moon. They are not omnipotent, nor creators, but guardians who embody patience and sacrifice. To call upon the giants is to remember that gods need not shape worlds to be divine. They may simply preserve them, standing silent until their aid is required. Even darker deities linger on the edges of legend. In Breath of the Wild, the calamity known as malice takes on an almost divine quality, as if the hatred of Demise and Ganondorf had fermented into a godlike force of its own. Malice seeps from the earth like a poison, corrupting machines, beasts, and even the land itself. It is not a god in the traditional sense, but it functions like one, an impersonal, relentless force of destruction, omnipresent, and nearly impossible to eradicate. Malice is the shadow counterpart to Ferori's life-giving energy, a god not of creation, but of rot. And in this, it becomes something far greater than a simple enemy. It becomes myth itself, the story that hatred never dies, that evil is a god in its own right, endlessly reborn through time. Together, these beings, the fierce deity, Majora, the windfish, the Uka, the giants, and even Malice, expand the pantheon of Zelda into something stranger and more dreamlike. They are gods without temples, deities without neat definitions. Some embody dreams, some chaos, some war, some guardianship. They remind us that mythology is never a single thread but a tapestry, one that grows richer the more we pull at its edges. And in Zelda, the edges of myth are always blurred. Is the fierce deity a god or a mask? Is Majora a demon or a dream of destruction? Is the windfish a creator or just a sleeper? In the end, Zelda does not answer these questions. It leaves them open for us to ponder in the quiet spaces between dreams, in the liminal places where gods might still be watching. And perhaps that is what makes these forgotten deities so powerful. They resist closure. They are divine precisely because they cannot be fully known. Among all the stories that travel from one age to another in the lands of Zelda, few carry as much weight or as much sorrow as the tale of Demise and the curse he cast before his end. This is a story that folds gods and mortals into the same cloth, a myth that explains why heroes and villains return in endless cycles, why the same struggle appears in new faces and familiar places. It is not merely a legend told beside hearths. It is the deep current beneath many of the series' ages, the reason the same names, the same symbols, and the same duties keep reappearing like tides. To tell the tale gently, as a way to fall asleep to, is to listen to an ancient rhythm, and to understand how repetition can itself be a form of instruction. Long before kingdoms rose and names were fixed in stone, the world was raw and unfixed, shaped by powers that were older than language. The golden goddesses had given the world being and balance, crafting land, law, and life, and leaving behind the Triforce, a perfect triangle of power, wisdom, and courage. But balance invites opposition. Where creation sings, destruction listens. To the goddesses' careful order, there answered a force that sought to unmake rather than to shape. That force took mortal form in a being now called by a name that trembles in the old songs, Demise. His appetite was not for territory alone, but for erasure, the wish that existence might fall quiet beneath his will. Demise was not merely an enemy of kingdoms. He embodied annihilation. His desire was so absolute that the world itself seemed to respond to it, as a sickness responds to a wound. Against such hunger, the gods and their chosen champions had to stand together. Hylia, the guardian, who would later be reborn as the princess in many ages, rose to oppose him. She gathered surviving peoples and gave them refuge, teaching mortals that their lives were not worth less because they were frail. Hylia's defiance is central to the story, for she did what gods seldom do. She bound her purpose to the fate of mortals rather than retreat to the heavens. Her choice is a tender fiction in mythic form, showing that divinity can choose mortality to protect what it loves. The battle that followed was titanic, a contest of forces that read like thunder in memory. Demise was finally struck down by a champion, but the nature of his being resisted ordinary death. Hatred, in that myth, behaves like a seed that does not rot. As his body fell, his malice lingered, seeping into the world like a stain that refused to fade. In his final act, Demise pronounced a curse, a terrible vow that would bind future generations into the same pattern of suffering and resistance. His words were simple and monstrous. Hatred shall pursue the one who faces me, and their spirits shall be reborn to carry my wrath forward. This oath redefines history and the legend. It turns chronological events into a cyclical song in which the same notes keep returning. The hero rises. The villain seeks power. The princess stands as wisdom and restraint between them. Link, Zelda, and Ganondorf, those names echo across eras as avatars of courage, wisdom, and power. They are not always the same individual, of course. Each incarnation wears different clothes, bears different scars. But beneath personality lies a sameness, a role, an echo, a thread that ties ages together. The curse makes this repetition not accidental, but inevitable, a pattern sewn into the fabric of the world. Consider Ganondorf, the figure most commonly associated with Demise's rebirth. He begins as human, a Gerudo with hunger for influence, but he becomes more when he seizes the Triforce's aspect of power, or when Demise's essence finds a body willing to host it. In Ganondorf, we see the tragedy of a mortal co-opted by something older. He is a man who can be read as both victim and villain, someone whose actions are deliberate and destructive, yet whose thirst may have germinated in a soil of scarcity, neglect, or desperate ambition. The curse does not remove his agency. It complicates it, offering a way to see how evil can arise not from emptiness, but from wounds left unhealed. Opposite him stands Link, sometimes a shy boy with a wooden sword, sometimes a weary knight, sometimes a carefree sailor who learns steadiness on the waves. Link is the embodiment of courage that is reborn not as fame, but as obligation, a willingness to stand when the world asks. He seldom remembers previous lives. The myth keeps him humble by letting him begin anew each time. Yet courage behaves like an inheritance. Even when memory fades, the capacity for bravery survives, appearing as reflex or instinct. The hero's path is less a destiny than a calling that the heart recognizes and answers again and again. Zelda, in her many forms, carries Hylia's memory like a soft ache. She is wisdom made flesh, and the living reminder that divinity can choose mortality. Her compassion and restraint are not abstract virtues, but burdens she shoulders so others may act freely. In some ages she is queen, and in others scholar, healer, or hidden oracle. But she always practices the difficult art of tempering power with discernment, seeing threats, and choosing whether to confront or to counsel. Her role is often silent and sacrificial. She guides from the center rather than from the front lines, using subtlety and forethought to keep balance. The curse, then, is less an arbitrary punishment than a cosmic law embedded by Demise's vow. It ensures repetition because hatred finds ways to endure. One could view this as a grim narrative device that guarantees continuity across games. But it is also a tender parable. Hatred persists because it can be taught, reinforced, and ritualized. It spreads like a habit. If the world remembers violence as honor, children learn it as tradition. Thus the legend becomes not merely prophecy, but pedagogy, an illustration of how the social and the spiritual reinforce each other. Within this framing, the recurring conflict becomes moral teaching. Each age offers a variation on a theme. How will a people respond when shadow rises again? Will leaders choose vengeance or repair? Will heroes learn to use power with humility? The cycles offer different answers, and those differences matter. In some eras, villains are simple, covetous tyrants. In others, they are figures made monstrous by loss and fear. In some retellings, heroes err, responding with hubris that nearly undoes their victories. Those variations keep the myth alive. The pattern is inevitable, but its texture changes with each telling. One of the most beautiful aspects of the saga is how it allows for small acts of grace within the cycle designed for violence. Even if a curse guarantees recurrence, individuals can still choose merciful paths that reshape the local outcome. A princess might spare an enemy, causing a chain reaction that softens a culture. A hero might refuse to strike an enemy who has surrendered, teaching others that strength can be gentler than fury. Those choices do not end the cycle outright, but they bend it, creating alternate futures that are gentler and more reparative. Scholars within the story's world sometimes speculate that the curse is as much mimetic as metaphysical. Hatred and aggression propagate by ritual, by songs, by the behaviors praised in tales. From this view, breaking the curse requires cultural work, changing what children sing, what monuments honor, what schoolrooms teach. If hatred can be ritualized, so too can kindness. It becomes possible to imagine a future in which the dominant rites and stories value restraint, empathy, and mutual aid, where bards choose refrains about repair over refrains about conquest. There are also small images that linger at the edges of these tales, soft scenes that make the curse feel close and human, rather than only cosmic. Imagine a child pressed into a cupboard listening to the clamor of armor and hearing instead a lullaby learned from a mother who once defied the dark. Imagine a farmer polishing a faded trinket with the emblem of courage, not because he expects battle, but because the token steadies his hands and reminds him to help a neighbor. Imagine an elder by a hearth carving a motif into a beam, teaching grandchildren that some things are worth defending, even when the reasons seem faint. These small images suggest that myth survives not only through prophecy, but through ordinary tenderness. They show how the great curse of hatred can be checked by countless tiny commitments that together form a different kind of inheritance. Those commitments are practice, forgiving a slight when revenge would be easier, teaching children songs about courage that include compassion alongside bravery, choosing mercy when law demands punishment. In such acts, the world tilts ever so slightly away from repetition and toward variation. Scholars in the tale sometimes call this the pedagogy of hope, the idea that stories and rituals train minds toward either cruelty or care. If hatred can be taught and ritualized, and so can gentleness. The work of breaking a pattern is slow and cumulative, not dramatic and immediate. One age cannot unmake all the past, but one generation can make a different beginning for the next. Consider how songs change. A bard who alters a refrain to include an ancestor's mercy rather than an ancestor's vengeance shifts what children carry into adulthood. Consider how law changes when rulers choose restorative practices over retribution, and how those changes ripple through villages and temple courts. These are the humble technologies of change, quiet but effective. They stand in contrast to the violent cycles that curses prefer, operating instead by accretion of small kindnesses. In the quiet before sleep, such images can feel comforting. The idea that the long string of ages might be rewoven by hands that say no to repetition, that choose repair over rancor. And so the myth of Demise, heavy and terrible as it is, sits beside another story, one of patient repair, the slow, steady work of those who teach the next age to value courage married to wisdom and hope married to restraint. The story of gods and mortals in Zelda is never content to sit still. Just as one thread comes to rest, another rises to take its place, like a melody that shifts key but still carries the same rhythm. To continue the flow, we now turn from the cycle of demise and the inevitability of hatred to the gentler but no less powerful weave of myths that tie the Triforce, the goddesses, and the many symbols of creation together. These are not only stories of battles, but stories of beginnings, of gifts left behind, a balance maintained through fragile means. They are the tales people whisper when the wind is quiet, the lore carried down by sages who prefer teaching with parable rather than decree. To enter them is to enter the dreamlike space between waking and rest, where every image feels soft-edged yet radiant with meaning. The creation and myth of Hyrule is one of the oldest and most important. It begins with 3 golden figures descending into the void that was not yet a world. Din, Nehru, and Ferori, each embodying an aspect of divinity, acted not as rivals, but as parts of a single harmony. Din, the goddess of power with her strong and flaming arms, sculpted the land and raised the mountains. Her presence was not merely violent, but foundational, as if strength itself could carve borders where there was only emptiness. Nehru, the goddess of wisdom, followed, giving law and reason to the world so that it would not collapse into chaos. Her gifts were intangible, written into the fabric of how rivers knew where to flow and how seasons knew when to change. Ferori, the goddess of courage, came last, creating life itself, animals, plants, and mortals who could thrive upon the land shaped by power and guided by wisdom. When their work was done, they left behind the Triforce, a golden triangle that embodied each of their aspects in perfect balance. Then they departed to the heavens, entrusting the world to mortals, sages, and guardians. The myth carries more than theology. It holds a vision of what balance means. Power without wisdom becomes tyranny. Wisdom without courage becomes hesitation. Courage without power becomes fragility. The Triforce, resting in sacred spaces, reminds mortals that each quality is incomplete alone. It is not an accident that so many of Zelda's stories revolve around the disruption of this balance. When one person seizes power, or when courage is separated from wisdom, the harmony of the world begins to fracture. Thus, the myth of the goddesses is less a tale of origins than a continuing lesson. Balance is not permanent, but must be tended to again and again, like a flame in the wind. This origin story also explains why mortals are capable of greatness, even though they are fragile compared to gods. By giving life, Ferorian ensured that mortals themselves carry courage within them. By granting order, Nayru ensured they could think, reason, and remember. By shaping the land, Din gave them a place to stand and the raw material to create. These gifts mean that even ordinary people, with no knowledge of prophecy, can embody aspects of divinity. A farmer who plows the field is participating in Din's strength. A scholar who teaches her students is partaking in Nehru's wisdom. A child who dares to step into the unknown is echoing Ferora's courage. In this way, the myth humbles and elevates mortals at once. Though they are smaller than gods, they are not without spark. This understanding brings us to the role of the sages who appear across different ages as keepers of ancient truth. Sages are mortals who carry pieces of divine resonance, chosen not always for might, but for their capacity to embody a virtue. In one age, a sage may be a musician who channels wisdom through song. In another, a warrior who defends a temple, not by aggression, but by loyalty. Sages serve as bridges, binding the divine will with the mortal struggle. Their stories, scattered across Zelda's ages, remind us that wisdom does not only reside in the heavens, it finds expression in individuals who stand quietly, steadfastly, in their places of calling. Among the myths that expand this story, none is more striking than that of the Triforce itself. Unlike other divine relics, it is not conscious. It does not choose its bearer with discernment. It merely responds to the strength of desire. If someone touches it with a heart balanced in power, wisdom, and courage, they gain its complete blessing. But if the one is unbalanced, the Triforce fractures, bestowing only the piece that matches their strongest quality, while the other pieces seek out new hosts. This mechanism makes the Triforce a mirror of the soul. It shows mortals not only what they long for, but who they are at their core. Many tales revolve around this division. Ganondorf receiving the Triforce of power, Zelda inheriting wisdom, and Link bearing courage. Each reflects not an arbitrary assignment, but a revelation of inner truth. The myth of the Triforce is a profound meditation on desire and responsibility. To crave power above all is not in itself evil. It may reflect the will to protect or the determination to survive. But when power dominates without the counterweight of wisdom and courage, it corrodes, becoming the hunger that devours itself. Likewise, wisdom without courage collapses into passivity, the endless analysis that never risks action. Courage without power may inspire but cannot sustain change. Thus, the Triforce acts as both gift and test, offering mortals a chance to recognize their imbalance and live accordingly. It does not punish but reveals, and that revelation often decides the fate of kingdoms. Another thread in this web of myths is the figure of Hylia, a goddess who chose to descend and walk as mortal. Her story represents the bridge between creation myth and lived history, between the aloof golden goddesses and the intimate struggles of human hearts. Hylia is remembered as the protector who safeguarded mortals from Demise's wrath, raising the surviving people into the skies until the surface could be reclaimed. Her sacrifice was not only martial but maternal. She took the role of caretaker as much as warrior, embodying both resilience and tenderness. Eventually, she chose to shed her divinity entirely, to be reborn as Zelda, intertwining her fate with mortals forever. This choice teaches a profound lesson. True guardianship is not exercised from above, but alongside. Divinity that refuses distance becomes solidarity, and that solidarity is remembered in every Zelda who follows. The myths also tell of other deities, figures less central than the three golden goddesses, but essential to the shape of the world. Nayru, Din, and Ferori may have departed, but their echoes are found in guardian spirits, elemental protectors, and demigods that govern more specific domains. Nayru, for instance, is remembered in certain ages not only as a goddess of wisdom, but as a nurturing figure whose song soothes storms. Din is recalled in fires that cleanse as well as destroy, a reminder that power can be both creative and consuming. Ferori, ever linked to life, is invoked when planting crops, when healing illness, and when summoning courage in despair. Their presence may be distant, but in ritual and prayer they remain close. Consider also the myth of the windfish remembered in The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening. The windfish is not a god of creation, but a being whose dreams shape realities. To sleep within its egg is to conjure entire worlds that vanish upon waking. The myth asks unsettling questions about the nature of existence. Is a dream any less meaningful because it ends? Are lives within those dreams any less real because they dissolve with the dawn? To answer these questions is difficult, but the myth itself leans toward tenderness, suggesting that even fleeting realities leave impressions. Just as mortals live for time and then pass, so do dream worlds vanish, but their meaning persists in memory. For those falling asleep, the windfish's story is especially comforting. To dream is not to waste time, but to participate in creation itself. The gods of Zelda are not always benevolent. There are darker figures, malicious forces that claim divinity or that mortals interpret as gods in their fear. Demise himself was framed as a godlike force, though in truth he was more a primeval evil than a deity. The presence of such figures complicates theology within the world of Zelda, reminding us that divinity is not synonymous with goodness. Power without balance can appear godlike, and mortals may mistake overwhelming force for divine right. This tension enriches the myths. They are not simplistic stories where gods are only kind and devils only cruel. Instead, they reflect the ambiguity of existence, where even divine power can be misused. One recurring symbol within these myths is light itself. Light is often described as divine essence, the visible signature of the gods. When Zelda channels holy energy, it often manifests as radiant light that pierces darkness. When sages call upon their powers, beams of light rise like pillars into the sky. Light here is not merely illumination, but the embodiment of order and hope, the quality that resists dissolution. Yet even light is not absolute. It must be sheltered and guarded. The mythology teaches that light can be obscured but never extinguished, and that mortals carry fragments of that light in their own spirits. The Master Sword, too, holds mythic status. Forged by divine will and tempered by mortal hands, it stands as the blade of evil's bane, a weapon that does not merely cut, but consecrates. Its presence in legend is inseparable from the cycle of heroism. Whenever darkness rises, the blade awaits the one who can wield it with purity of heart. Unlike the Triforce, which reveals desire, the Master Sword judges worthiness through deed. It does not respond to craving, but to character. Many myths describe how would-be wielders failed to lift it, not because they lacked strength, but because they lacked selflessness. The sword's resting places, hidden temples, sealed pedestals, sacred groves, reinforce its role as a trial. To reach it is to pass through labyrinths that test mind, body, and spirit, ensuring that only the hero may draw it forth. The myths surrounding the gods, the Triforce, and the sacred relics remind us of something profound. Zelda's stories are not only about struggle, but about inheritance. Every generation inherits not only land and law, but also myths, stories that shape how they understand themselves. A farmer may never touch the Triforce, but he knows that courage, wisdom, and power must balance in his own household. A child may never meet Hylia, but she learns through lullabies that the goddess once chose to become human for love of mortals. These stories teach not through commandments, but through memory, embedding values into the very fabric of how people live. For those listening now, drifting towards sleep, these myths form a soothing rhythm. They remind us that creation itself was balanced, that courage, wisdom, and power are woven into existence, and that divinity can choose to walk beside mortals rather than above them. They remind us that even in cycles of darkness, there are lights that never fade, that dreams, even if brief, carry meaning, and that the sacred is often found not in grandeur, but in small, quiet acts of courage. As the stories flow one into another, we see how myths and gods in Zelda are not abstract puzzles, but soft, enduring truths, that balance must be cherished, that light persists, and that every soul, however small, carries a fragment of the divine flame. The myths of Zelda are not just stories about gods, kingdoms, and heroes. They are also myths about cycles, about how the world itself bends back upon itself to repeat the eternal struggle of light and shadow. This cycle is not a single tale, but an ever-branching pattern, a tree whose roots stretch into the unknown and whose branches touch every possible sky. And yet, even in this vastness, the divine continues to shape, to whisper, to watch. For in the Zelda universe, the divine is never static. It is alive, breathing through time, destiny, and the choices of those who carry courage in their hearts. To explore further is to return once more to the beginning and then go beyond it. For though we have spoken of Hylia, of Din, Nehru, and Furore, and of Demise and the shadow that became Ganya, there are still other figures who drift along the edges of mythology, neither wholly god nor entirely mortal, but something in between, straddling the divine and the earthly. These figures often appear as guides, watchers, or caretakers, shaping the path of the hero while reminding us that the divine cannot always intervene directly, but must instead act through those who live in the world. Take, for instance, the figure of the great Deku Tree. To call the Deku Tree merely a guardian would be to diminish his role, for he is not just protector of a forest, but a keeper of sacred memory. His roots stretch deep into the soil, into the very veins of the earth, where ancient power flows like lifeblood. He carries the wisdom of countless ages, and in his booming, resonant voice, there lies the authority of something more than mortal. Is he a god? Perhaps not in the sense of Din or Nehru, yet he is undeniably divine. For the forest itself is sacred, and he is its living embodiment. Myths surrounding the great Deku Tree speak of his ability to foresee the future, to sense disturbances in the flow of destiny, and to nurture chosen heroes. He is not a god who creates, nor a god who destroys, but rather a god who sustains, who ensures that balance remains in place so that life may continue. And what of the windfish, the dreaming god whose slumber creates an entire world? In the tale of Link's awakening, the windfish embodies the fragile line between reality and dream. The island of Koholint, with its towns, mountains, seas, and even its people, exists only within his dream. To awaken him is to destroy that dream, to erase it completely. And yet the myth reveals a deeper truth. Even dreams carry weight. Even illusions can shape the soul of a hero. The windfish is perhaps one of the most poignant examples of divinity in the Zelda mythos, for he shows that gods do not merely shape worlds of stone and soil, but also worlds of thought and imagination. The windfish reminds us that even the most fleeting visions can leave eternal marks on those who witness them. The myths of Zelda also tell of time itself as a divine force, not merely the ticking of moments or the passing of years, but time as a living, shaping current, a river whose flow is watched over by guardians. In Ocarina of Time, we meet the sages, wise beings who embody elemental forces and who act as protectors of the sacred realm. They are not gods in the traditional sense, but their role is godlike, for they safeguard the boundary between worlds. Time itself is personified through the ocarina, a sacred instrument capable of bending destiny, turning back days, calling upon storms, or even opening doors sealed by the ages. It is said that the goddesses created time when they formed the world, and though they rarely appear, time remains their voice, their instrument, for ensuring that the eternal cycle continues as it must. If time is divine, then so too is fate. And here we encounter one of the most mysterious aspects of the Zelda myths, the Sheikah. The Sheikah are not gods, but they are closer to the divine than ordinary mortals. They serve as the shadow hands of the goddess Hylia, her chosen guardians, who move unseen, keeping the balance and protecting the secrets that bind the world together. They are myths wrapped in flesh, for while they live as mortals, their loyalty is eternal, their purpose divine. The myths tell of their unmatched skill, their mastery of both shadow and light, their knowledge of the sacred artifacts that can sway destiny itself. And within the Sheikah, the most iconic figure emerges, Impa, the eternal guardian. Across countless generations and timelines, Impa appears again and again, always standing by Zelda, always ensuring that the goddess's will is upheld. Her endurance across cycles is itself a divine quality, suggesting that Impa is less a single person and more a role, a spirit passed down, an eternal guardian born anew with each age. Yet, while the forces of light and shadow define much of the myth, there are also the spirits who inhabit the natural world, who remind us that divinity is not always about creation and destruction, but also about harmony. In Twilight Princess, the light spirits, Lanairu, Eldin, Farron, and Ordona, appear as ethereal beings, luminous guardians who protect their provinces from corruption. They are serene yet powerful, and their forms are radiant reminders of the goddess's original gifts. Unlike the goddesses, who remain distant, the light spirits are near, their voices soft but present, their forms shining in twilight. They embody the idea that divinity exists not just in the heavens, but within the land itself, a reminder that the sacred is never far from the soil beneath our feet. The myths also whisper of the interlopers, the sorcerers who sought to claim the power of the gods for themselves. Banished to the Twilight realm, they became the Twilight, forever separated from the world of light. Their punishment reveals a divine principle, that mortals who seek to ascend to godhood without the blessing of the divine will be cast down, transformed into something twisted, exiled from the harmony of creation. Yet even in their exile, the Twilight remain bound to the divine, for their very existence is a shadow of the gods' will, a living reminder of the boundary between mortal ambition and divine decree. Midna, the Twilight Princess, emerges from this myth not as a goddess, but as a figure of redemption, bridging the gap between shadow and light, proving that even those cast aside by divine wrath can play a role in restoring balance. Balance is a constant theme in these myths, and nowhere is it more apparent than in the duality of the Triforce. This sacred relic, left behind by the goddesses, embodies the essence of divinity itself. Power, wisdom, and courage are not merely virtues. They are fragments of the divine will, eternal truths that cannot be erased. Each piece is incomplete without the others, yet together they form a perfect whole. The myths reveal that when one piece is claimed without the others, imbalance follows. Tyranny, despair, chaos. But when the three are united, harmony is restored. The Triforce is not merely a relic. It is the very heart of the mythos, the divine law made manifest. It binds gods and mortals alike, a symbol of eternal truth that transcends every cycle. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of Zelda's divine myths is the silence of the gods. The goddesses rarely appeared directly. They created, they departed, and they left behind their artifacts, their relics, their guardians. In their absence, the world struggles, fights, hopes, and falls. This silence is itself divine, for it forces mortals to take responsibility, to act, to carry courage into the darkness, even when no voice guides them. The silence of the gods is not neglect. It is a test, a reminder that divinity lives within the choices of mortals. For though Din shaped the land, Hyrule gave wisdom, and Furore granted life, it is ultimately the hero and the people who must decide how to live, how to fight, how to rebuild when shadow rises again. The myths of Zelda are vast, branching, endless, yet they all return to a single truth, that the struggle between light and darkness is eternal, and that within this struggle, the divine is never far. Whether it is the watchful eye of the great Deku tree, the dream of the windfish, the shining guardians of Twilight, or the eternal balance of the Triforce, the presence of the gods is always there, sometimes near, sometimes far, but always shaping, always reminding. And so the cycle continues, for each new age brings new heroes, new challenges, new echoes of ancient myths. The gods remain silent, but their creations, time, courage, wisdom, power, continue to weave the threads of destiny. And as the myths whisper on, they remind us of something both profound and humbling, that even gods are bound by the worlds they create, that even divinity cannot escape the cycles it sets in motion, and that the truest expression of the divine may not be in the heavens above, but in the courage of a single hero, standing against the darkness, carrying the light forward into another age. To speak of the gods and myths of Zelda is to walk through a vast tapestry of stories that intertwine, break apart, and converge again like rivers meeting in an endless sea. The cycle of creation and destruction, of heroes and villains, of silence and song, reminds us that the divine is not something distant or unreachable, but something that hums within the very fabric of existence. Every corner of Hyrule and its surrounding worlds, every mountain, every forest, every sea and sky carries the echo of divinity. And every hero, every villain, every ordinary soul who dares to act becomes part of the myth that the gods once set in motion. As we step deeper into these myths, we begin to see not only the gods themselves, but the way their influence permeates through all beings. Consider the dragons, ancient, awe-inspiring entities who fly between the mortal and divine realms. In Breath of the Wild, we see Naedra, Dinraal, and Farosh, immense serpentine beings who carry elemental power within their very breath. They are neither wholly benevolent nor malicious. They exist as natural forces, embodiments of divine energy. Their presence reminds us that the gods' gifts did not end with the Triforce. They shaped the world in layers, embedding divinity into beasts, rivers, winds, and flames. To encounter a dragon is to witness divinity in motion, to feel the world tremble under the weight of something older than memory, something that transcends mortality. Then there are the gods and guardians tied not to the great cycles, but to specific regions, cultures, and peoples. The Rito look to Valu, the dragon perched atop Dragon Roost Island, who provides not just heat, but divine blessing. The Zora revere Jabu Jabu, a massive fish deity, whose very body shelters and sustains. The Gorons hold faith in the spirits of fire who bless their volcanic homes and grant them the strength to endure the harshest of elements. These gods and guardians are not universal in their reach, but deeply intimate, tied to the communities who worship them. They show that divinity in Zelda is not just about the grand cycle of time and shadow, but also about the small, personal bonds between people and the powers that nurture them. The myths also speak of the otherworldly, realms that exist parallel to the mortal plane. The Sacred Realm is perhaps the most famous of these, a space outside of time where the Triforce rests. But there are also realms of shadow, dream, and twilight. Termina, the strange parallel world from Majora's Mask, reveals an unsettling truth. Perhaps other worlds exist beyond Hyrule, each with its own gods, myths, and cycles. The fierce deity, whose mask carries unspeakable power, is never fully explained, leaving scholars and storytellers alike to wonder whether this figure was a god, a hero of unimaginable might, or something in between. And Majora itself, a chaotic force trapped within a mask, represents another shade of divinity, destructive, alien, incomprehensible. These myths hint that divinity is not always kind, nor always comprehensible. Sometimes gods may appear as madness itself, as chaos that resists order. If we step back, we begin to see that the myths of Zelda are not neatly divided into good and evil, divine and mortal, light and dark. Rather, they reveal a spectrum, a living balance. The gods create, but they also destroy. They guide, but they also remain silent. They bless, but they also curse. In this balance, mortals are forced to act, to define their own roles in the cycle. Link, Zelda, Ganon, they are not merely pawns, but participants, reflections of divine power filtered through human will. Link embodies courage, not because it is granted to him from above, but because he chooses again and again to rise. Zelda embodies wisdom, not as a passive gift, but as an active responsibility, guiding others, sacrificing, carrying the burden of leadership. Even Ganon embodies power not as a mere curse, but as an expression of will, ambition, defiance against silence itself. This tension, the push and pull between divine influence and mortal choice, is what gives the Zelda myths their depth. For if the gods had never left, if they had never fallen silent, there would be no need for heroes, no reason for mortals to rise. It is in their absence that courage shines brightest. And in this way, the myths tell us something deeply human, that even when the divine feels distant, even when the gods seem silent, their legacy lives within us, pushing us forward, giving us the chance to shape destiny with our own hands. And so we come to the heart of it all, the eternal cycle. Each age brings a new Link, a new Zelda, a new incarnation of Ganon, and each age repeats the struggle of balance. But within this repetition, there is also variation. Some ages end in triumph, others in tragedy. Some cycles bring unity, others devastation. Yet the cycle itself never ends, for it is bound by the laws of divinity. The gods created a world that renews itself through struggle, that continues forward by facing backward. And within that cycle, myths accumulate like layers of stone, building a mountain of legend that continues to grow with each telling. But perhaps the greatest myth of all is not about gods or relics, heroes or villains, but about the story itself. For every Zelda game, every tale passed down through generations is part of a larger mythos, a story that stretches beyond the boundaries of any one timeline. In this way, The gods of Zelda do not just exist within the world. They exist in the act of storytelling itself. To tell the tale is to give life to the myth, to keep the divine alive, to let the gods speak again through the voices of those who remember. And so, as this chapter of our exploration closes, we stand at a threshold. We have walked through the birth of the world, seen the goddesses craft land, wisdom, and life. We have traced the cycle of Demise's curse, the rise and fall of Ganon, the courage of Link, the wisdom of Zelda. We have wandered through Twilight, dream, and shadow, and stood in awe before dragons, spirits, and guardians. And through it all, we have seen the divine not as something distant and untouchable, but as something present, alive, whispering through the time itself. But there is still more. For while we have explored the myths and gods, we have only begun to touch the stories of those who live within their shadow, the people, the cultures, the families who build their lives in a world forever shaped by divine hands. In the next episode, we will step away from the gods and turn toward those who live beneath their silent gaze. We will ask, how do ordinary people survive in a land where gods create cycles of endless struggle? What myths do the villagers, the travelers, the wanderers tell to themselves? And how do these small human stories weave into the great tapestry of gods and heroes? The myths of Zelda remind us that divinity is both vast and intimate, eternal and fleeting. And as we close this chapter, we carry with us the sense that the story is not finished, that the cycle continues. And that even now, somewhere within the vast fields of Hyrule, another hero is awakening, another legend is beginning, another myth is waiting to be told.